Sometimes, Tsukuru couldn't really understand why he was included in the group of five. Did the others really need him? Wouldn't he be able to relax and have a better time if he weren't there? Maybe they just hadn't realized it yet, and it was only a matter of time before they did. The more he pondered this dilemma, the less he understood. Trying to sort out his value to the group was like trying to weight something that had no unit value. The needle on the scale wouldn't settle on a number. But none of these concerns seemed to bother the other four. Tsukuru could see that they genuinely loved it when all five of them got together as a group. Like an equilateral pentagon, where all sides are the same length. The group's formation had to be composed of 5 people exactly. Any more or any less wouldn't do. They believed that this was true. And naturally, Tsukuru was happy and proud to be included as one indispensable side of the pentagon. He loved his 4 friends, loved the sense of belonging he felt when he was with them. Like a young tree absorbing nutrition from the soil. Tsukuru got the sustenance he needed as an adolescent from this group, using it as necessary food to grow, storing what was left as an emergency heat source inside him. Still, he had a constant, nagging fear that someday he would fall away from the intimate community, or be forced out and left on his own. Anxiety raised his head like a jagged, ominous rock exposed to receding tide. The fear that he would be separated from the group and end up entirely alone. So you really like railway stations that much ever since you were little? Sarah Kimoto asked. She sounded impressed. Tsukuru nodded cautiously. The last thing he wanted was for her to think he was one of those otaku-ness he knew from the engineering department's work. The kind who was so wrapped up in their jobs that work became their whole world. The way the conversation was going, though, she might end up thinking just that. That's right, he admitted. Since I was a kid, I've always liked stations. You've certainly led a very consistent life, she said. She seemed amused by it, but he couldn't detect any negativity in her tone. Why it had to be stations, I can't say. Sarah smiled. It must be your calling. Maybe so, Tsukuru said. How did we wind up talking about this? Tsukuru wondered. That had happened so long ago, and he much preferred to wipe it from memory. But Sarah, for whatever reason, wanted to hear about his high school days. What kind of student was he? What did he do back then? And before he knew it, he segued into talking about his close group of 5 friends. The 4 colorful people, and colorless Tsukuru Tazaki. Sarah and Tsukuru were at a bar on the outskirts of Ebisu. They had a dinner reservation at a small Japanese-style restaurant that Sarah knew. But since she had eaten a late lunch and wasn't hungry, they cancelled the reservation and went out for cocktails instead. Tsukuru wasn't hungry either, and didn't mind skipping dinner. He wasn't such a big eater to begin with. He could get by on cheese and nuts at the bar. Sarah was 2 years older than Tsukuru and worked in a large travel agency. She specialized in package tours abroad and took a lot of business trips overseas. Tsukuru, in his calling, worked for a railway company in a department that oversaw the design of railway stations in the western parts of the Kanto region around Tokyo. So although there was no direct connection between their jobs, in a way they both involved aspects of the transportation industry. He and Sarah had met at a party to celebrate his boss's newly constructed house, where they had exchanged email addresses. This was their fourth date. After dinner on the third date, in what seemed like a natural progression of events, they had gone back to his apartment and made love. Today was 1 week later, a delicate stage in the burgeoning relationship. If they continued to see each other after this, things would surely get more serious. Tsukuru was 36, Sarah 38. This wasn't, of course, some high school crush. From the first time he saw her, Tsukuru had liked Sarah's looks. She wasn't typically beautiful. Her prominent cheekbones gave her an obstinate look, and her nose was narrow and pointed. But there was something indefinably vital and alive about her face that caught his eye. Her eyes were narrow, but when she really looked at something, they suddenly opened wide. 2 dark eyes, never timid, brimming with curiosity. He wasn't normally conscious of it, but there was one part of his body that was extremely sensitive. Somewhere along his back, the soft, subtle spot he couldn't reach was usually covered by something, so that it was invisible to the naked eye. But when, for whatever reason, that spot became exposed, and someone's finger pressed down on it, something inside him would stir. A special substance would be secreted, swiftly carried by his bloodstream to every corner of his body. That special stimulus was both a physical sensation and a mental one, creating vivid images in his mind. The first time he met Sarah, he felt an enormous finger reached out and pushed down forcefully on that trigger on his back. The day they met, they talked for a long time, though he couldn't recall much of what they said. What he did recall was the special feeling on his back, and the indefinably thrilling sensation it brought to his mind and body. One part of him relaxed, another part tightened up. That sort of feeling. But what did it mean? Tsukuru thought about this for days, but he was not by nature adept at abstract thinking. So Tsukuru emailed Sarah and invited her to dinner. He was determined to find out the meaning of that feeling, of that sensation. Just as he appreciated Sarah's appearance, he also enjoyed the way she dressed. Her clothes were always simple and subdued, but they were lovely and fit her perfectly. Tsukuru could easily imagine, though, that what appeared to be simple outfits had taken much time to choose, and also hadn't come cheap. Her accessories and makeup, too, were low-key yet refined. Tsukuru himself wasn't particular about clothes, but he always loved seeing a well-dressed woman, just like he enjoyed listening to beautiful music. His 2 older sisters loved clothes, and when they were young, before they went out on dates, they had grabbed Tsukuru first to get his opinion of the outfit. He wasn't sure why, but they were very serious about it. "What do you think?" they would ask. "Does this go well together?" And he would give his honest opinion from a male perspective. His sisters respected his opinions, which made him happy. And before long, this became a habit. As he sipped his weak highball, Tsukuru mentally undressed Sarah and hugging the back of her dress, quietly unzipping her. He had only slept with her once, but it had been wonderful and fulfilling. Dressed or undressed, she looked 5 years younger than she was, with pure white skin and beautifully rounded, modestly sized breasts. Leisurely foreplay, caressing her, had been amazing. And after he came, he had felt at peace as he held her close. But that wasn't all that was to it. He was well aware that there was something more. Making love was a journey, a connection between one person and another. You receive something, and you also have to give. What were your high school days like? Tsukuru asked. Sarah shook her head. I don't want to talk about that. It was pretty boring. I'll tell you about it sometime, but right now I want to hear about you. What happened to your group of 5 friends? Tsukuru picked up a handful of nuts and tossed a few in his mouth. We had several unspoken rules among us. One of them being, as much as we possibly can, we do things together, all 5 of us. We try to avoid having just 2 of us, for instance, going out somewhere. Otherwise, we were worried that the group might fall apart. We had to be centripetal units. I'm not sure how to put it. We were trying our best to maintain the group as an orderly, harmonious community. An orderly, harmonious community? Genuine surprise showed in her face. Tsukuru blushed a little. We were in high school and had all kinds of weird ideas. Sarah looked intently at Tsukuru, cocking her head a degree or two. I don't find it weird. But what was the purpose of that community? The original purpose, like I said, was to help out at an after-school program. This was where we all met and we all felt strongly about it. It remained an important collective goal. But as time passed, simply being a community ourselves became one of our goals too. You mean maintaining the group itself and keeping it going became one of your aims? I guess so. Sarah narrowed her eyes in a tight line. Just like the universe. I don't know much about the universe, Tsukuru said. But for us, it was very important. We had to protect the special chemistry that had developed among us, like protecting a lead match, keeping it from blowing out in the wind. Chemistry. The power that happened to arise at a point, something that could never be reproduced. Like the Big Bang. I'm not sure about that, Tsukuru said. Sarah took a sip of her mojito and examined the mint lid from several angles. I went to private girls' schools, she said, so I really don't understand those kind of co-ed groups at public schools. I can't picture what they are like. In order for the 5 of you to maintain that community, so it wouldn't fall apart, you try to be as abstinent as you could. Is that how it worked? Abstinent? I'm not sure that's the right word. It wasn't something that dramatic. It's true though, we were careful to keep relations with the opposite sex out of the group. But you never put that in words, Sarah said. Tsukuru nodded. We didn't verbalize it. It wasn't like we had rules or anything. What about you? You were with them all the time, so weren't you attracted at all to Shiro or Kuro? From what you told me, they sound pretty appealing. Both of the girls were appealing in their own way. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't attracted to them. but I tried as much as possible not to think of them that way. As much as possible. As much as possible, Tsukuru said. He felt his cheeks reddening again. When I couldn't help thinking of them, I always tried to think of them as a pair. The two of them as a pair. Tsukuru paused, searching for the right words. I can't really explain it. I thought of them like they were a fictitious being, like a formless, abstract being. Sarah appeared impressed. She thought about it. She seemed to want to say something, but then thought better of it. After a while, she spoke. So after you graduated from high school, you went to college in Tokyo and left Nagoya, is that right? That's right, Tsukuru said. I've lived in Tokyo ever since. What about the other four? They went to colleges in Nagoya area. Aka studied in the economics department of Nagoya University, the department where his father taught. Kuro attended a private women's college famous for its English departments. Ao got into business school at a private college that had a well-known rugby team on the strength of his athletic abilities. Shiro finally was persuaded to give up on being a veterinarian, and instead she studied piano in a music school. All four schools were close enough for them to commute from home. I was the only one who went to Tokyo, in my case to an engineering college. Why do you want to go to Tokyo? It's simple, really. There was a professor at my university who was an expert on railroad station construction. Constructing stations is a specialized field. They have a different structure from other buildings. So even if I went to an ordinary engineering school and studied construction and engineering, it wouldn't have been of much practical use. I needed to study with a specialist. Having a set, specific goal makes life easier, Sarah said. Tsukuru agreed. So the other four stayed in Nagoya because they didn't want that beautiful community to break up. When we were seniors in high school, we talked about where we were going to go to college. Except for me, they all planned to stay in Nagoya and go to college there. They didn't come out and say it exactly, but it was obvious they were doing that because they wanted to keep the group together. With his GPA, Aka could have easily gotten into a top school like Tokyo University, and his parents and teachers urged him to try. And Al's athletic skills could have won him a place in a well-known university too. Kuro's personality was well suited to the more sophisticated, intellectually stimulating life she might have found in a cosmopolitan environment. And she should have gone on to one of the private universities in Tokyo. Nagoya, of course, is a large city, but culturally it was much more provincial. In the end, all four of them decided to stay in Nagoya, settling for much less prestigious schools than they could have attended. Shiro was the only one who never would have left Nagoya, even if the group hadn't existed. She wasn't the type to venture out on her own in search of a more stimulating environment. When they asked me what my plans were, Tsukuru said, I told them I hadn't decided yet. But I had actually made up my mind to go to school in Tokyo. I mean, if I could have managed to stay back in Nagoya and half-heartedly study at some social college, I would have done it. If it meant I got to stay close to them, in a lot of ways, that would have been easier. And that's actually what my family was hoping I'd do. They sort of expected that after I graduated from college, I'll eventually take over my father's company. But I knew that if I didn't go to Tokyo, I would regret it. I just felt that I had to study with that professor. That makes sense, Sarah said. So after you decided you go to Tokyo, how did the others take it? I don't know how they really felt about it, of course, but I'm pretty sure they were disappointed. Without me in the equation, part of the sense of unity we always had was inevitably going to vanish. The chemistry, too. It would have changed into something different to some extent. Yet, when his friends realized how determined Tsukuru was to go, they didn't try to stop him. In fact, they encouraged him. Tokyo was only an hour and a half away by bullet train. He could come back anytime he wanted, right? And there's no guarantee you'll get into your first choice school anyway, they said, half kidding him. Passing the entrance exam for that university meant Tsukuru had to buckle down and study like never before. So what happened to your group after you all graduated from high school? Sarah asked. As far as everything went fine, I went back to Nagoya whenever there was school vacation, spring and fall break, summer vacation, and New Year's, and spent as much time as I could with the others. We were as close as always and got along well. Whenever he was back home, Tsukuru and his friends had lots to catch up on. After he left Nagoya, the other four continued to spend time together. But once he was back in town, they reverted to their five-person units. Though of course, there were times when some of them were busy and only 3 or 4 of them could get together. The other 4 brought him back into the fold, as if there had been no gap in time. Or at least, Tsukuru detected no subtle shift in mood, no invisible distance between them. And that made him very happy. That's why he hadn't cared that he hadn't made a single friend in Tokyo. Sarah narrowed her eyes and looked at him. You never made even one friend in Tokyo. I don't know why, but I just couldn't, Tsukuru said. I guess I'm basically not very outgoing. But don't get the wrong idea. I wasn't a shut-in or anything. This was the first time I was living on my own, free to do whatever I liked. I enjoyed my days. The railroad lines in Tokyo are like a web spread out over the city, with countless stations. Just seeing them took a lot of time. I'll go to different stations, check out how they were designed, pencil out some rough sketches, jot down anything special I noticed. It sounds like fun, Sarah said. The university itself, though, wasn't very exciting. Most of its courses in the beginning were general education classes, uninspiring and numbingly boring. Still, he worked hard to get into college, so he tried not to cut class. He studied German and French. He even went to a language lab to practice English. He discovered, to his surprise, that he had a knack for learning languages. Yet, he didn't meet anyone he was drawn to. Compared to his colorful, stimulating group of friends from high school, everyone else seemed spiritless, dull, insipid. He never met anyone he felt like getting to know better. So he spent most of his time in Tokyo alone. On the plus side, he read constantly, more than he ever had before. But didn't you feel lonely? Sarah said. I felt lonely, but not especially lonely. I guess I just took them for granted. He was young, and there was so much about the world he still didn't know. And Tokyo was a brand new place for him, so very different from the environment he had grown up in. And those differences were greater than he had ever anticipated. The scale of the city was overwhelming. The diversity of life there was extraordinary. There were too many choices of things to do. The way people talked struck him as odd, and the pace of life was too fast. He couldn't strike a good balance between himself and the world around him. But there was still a place for him to return. He knew this. Get on the bullet train at the Tokyo station, and in an hour and a half he arrived at an orderly, harmonious, intimate place, where time flowed by peacefully, where friends he could confide in eagerly awaited him. What about now? Sarah asked. Do you feel like you are maintaining a good balance between yourself and the world around you? I've been with this company for 14 years. The job's fine, and I enjoy the work. I get along with my colleagues, and I've been in relationships with a few women. Nothing ever came of it. But there were lots of reasons for that. It wasn't entirely my fault. And you are alone, but not lonely. It was still early, and they were the only customers in the bar. Music from a jazz trio played softly in the background. I suppose, Tsukuru said after some hesitation. But you can't go back now to that orderly, harmonious, intimate place. He thought about this, though there was no need to. That place doesn't exist anymore, he said quietly. It was in the summer of his sophomore year in college when that place vanished forever.